Okay. Good evening, everyone. Om Ajnanatamindasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshurumilitanina Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. So we're continuing our study of chapter 9, Bhagavad-Gita. You can move a little closer if you like. I can also. We're studying chapter 9 of Bhagavad-Gita. And as a quick review, because we have a few new guests we were mentioning on Monday's class. In the Bhagavad-Gita and in Vedanta traditions in general, they say that the root cause of suffering is ignorance. And simply put, the root cause of suffering is ignorance. Of course, I think anyone can understand that in a conventional sense, that when there's ignorance, you suffer. Just like a child may not know that fire burns, so he touches it because it's attractive, and then he gets burned. So ignorance is the cause of suffering. But by ignorance is very specifically defined in yoga traditions and in Vedanta tradition. Ignorance means when the conscious soul identifies itself with matter. And then this is called as ignorance. When the Atman, the self, is called as the Atman in the tradition. Then he identifies with what is anatman, what is not self. This gross physical body and this mind is not self, and yet we identify with that. So this is called as ignorance, and this is the root cause of suffering. Just like if you're watching a very good movie and you identify with a character in the movie, then you experience all their emotions vicariously. If they're happy, you're happy. If they're sad, you're sad. If they're frustrated, you're frustrated. If they're scared, you're scared. You've seen some movies like this, and you may have had this experience of feeling all the emotions of the character vicariously. So similarly, the body and mind is basically like a movie character that we're really invested in. And so we're feeling all the emotions of this character vicariously. The soul is looking at this character named Jaya, or what's your name?
What's my name?
Yes.
Alvina.
Alvina? Alvina. So that's one character, and you like your story, you're into your story. And your name is? For everyone. Ben, and you're into your story, and your name is? Ash. And you're into your story, right? Are you into Ben's story?
Not so much.
Not so much, not at all. Also, who is Ben? Even when you know people, you don't care about their story. You care about your story. And you care about them only in terms of they're fitting into your story. Otherwise, not so important. So like this, consciousness is looking at a particular body and mind, and we're invested in the character of that story, the character and that story. And so we're feeling all the emotions of that character vicariously. And we suffer, naturally, the consequences of that identification. Yes? This is not the true self, and little exercise that Vedanta traditions give to help us get a sense of how we're different from this self, this what we call ourselves, this empirical self, is that when you go to sleep at night and you dream, then this waking life disappears. And all the preoccupation of this waking life become inconsequential. They actually vanish completely, isn't it? When you go to sleep at night and dream, you forget about this waking life. Alvina, Ben, who is that also? And you become immersed in some other identity in the dream world. And when you wake up from the dream, then the dream world disappears. But there is one entity that is constant in both the waking and dream life. And that person is you, the person who's observing the waking life or the person who's observing the dream, right? But when you sleep, this waking life disappears. And when you wake from the dream world disappears. The only constant factor is you. It's a very interesting exercise. I like this one a lot. They give us a sense that the actual self is something different from the body and mind that we're preoccupied with. So as long as we're identified with this body, then we suffer the results of that identification. The worst of which is the perpetuation of the experience of death. Because these stories, as much as we're preoccupied with them, will come to an end. Right? The Alvina story, the Ben story, the Ash story. Abhinav story, Daniel story. All these stories will come to an end. Some of our stories will come to an end gloriously in our estimation. And some of our stories will come to an end ingloriously or frighteningly. There are different ways to story, but they will come to an end. And then you'll be thrown into another story that you become preoccupied with. And this goes on perpetually. This is called the samsara. So it is perpetuation of death. And this perpetuation of the experience of death is due to the identification of Atman, the self, with that which is not self, Anatman. This is called as a bodily conception of life. And so this bodily conception of life is a death sentence on the soul, because you are forced to experience death repeatedly. And so for yoga traditions or Vedanta traditions, one of their concerns is how to remove the death sentence, how to solve this ignorance problem. So Krishna has spoken in the Bhagavad-Gita also, at least prima facie for this reason as well, to remove the ignorance that the soul, which causes the soul to suffer. And so in the Gita, he gives knowledge, Gyan, and he gives three categories of knowledge: confidential, Guhyatara Gyan, and Guhyatama Gyan. Word Gyana means knowledge, and Guhya means secret or confidential. So Krishna has spoken these different categories of knowledge with the purpose of removing the death sentence from the soul, from removing ignorance. So confidential knowledge concerns understanding of the difference between consciousness and matter, which most people don't know, actually. I remember talking to people, and I would ask them a question. I would distribute books. Who are you? And most of the times, this is when I was living in the monastery, we would distribute books in the street. And I would ask a question, who are you? So they would give answer. Usually they would give their name. And then I would ask them, if you change your name, are you a different person? So they would say no. So then I would say, you haven't answered my question yet. And then I would ask again, so who are you? And sometimes people will again give their name. So I said, all right, can't be helped. But sometimes I would get interesting answers, like people saying that I'm a soul or I'm a child of God. Sometimes that would happen. So I would ask a question because I knew they didn't really have the realization of what that meant, or I was curious to see what they meant by that. So I would ask them, what does a soul do? So then they would say, I wake up in the morning, I brush my teeth, and then they would begin describing all the activities of the body and mind. So it is very hard for someone to actually realize the difference between consciousness and matter, and also the implications of what that means in terms of your relationships, not only relationships with family members or romantic partners or whatever, but also just your relationship with this world. Sometimes people understand academically what Krishna is saying in the Gita, that there's a difference between consciousness and matter. But when you have to think about the implications of what that means, that part is usually lost on the vast majority of even persons who study this philosophy. That you're not really part of this world, and therefore what should be your priority in life. All these things are implied by that understanding. Anyway, so Krishna speaks about that in the first 6 chapters of the Gita. Then he gets into more confidential knowledge, which is understanding the source of consciousness and matter. Consciousness and matter has a transcendent source, and that source is basically God. And in chapters 7 and 8, we encountered that God says, these are my energies, actually. The jiva means the soul or the atman, and prakriti, nature. So these are actually my energies, and I'm the source of them. And then he begins to speak about his relationship to this material world. So in most confidential knowledge, which is what we're encountering in chapter 9, Krishna begins to speak about devotion to himself. This is as the culmination of knowledge. So remember, keeping the context that this knowledge is to remove the death sentence, the ignorance that causes the self to identify with matter. Krishna is giving this knowledge, which includes knowledge of his worship, in order to remove the suffering. So this most confidential knowledge means knowledge of his worship. So in this chapter 9, we've encountered Krishna speaking about devotion to himself as the culmination of knowledge. All the knowledge that he's spoken of so far, the culmination is this it's an open secret, but it's a very well-kept secret. Even though it's open, he talks about it openly. Still hardly anyone understands it, so it remains a secret. And that secret is devotion to himself. And so in this chapter, we've already encountered Krishna speaking about himself and his position as God, because that nourishes devotion. And then he's spoken about how others view him. Some conceptions not nourishing devotion, some conceptions are totally against devotion. And he's spoken about those different ideas and how they, and the different results that they confer. For those who don't believe in God, and what is the result? For those who believe in God in a particular way, what is that result? And then he starts to really zoom in on devotion to himself. And we're on chapter 9, 31, 30. We're going to do 30 and 31 today. These are very famous verses in the Bhagavad-Gita, actually. And the previous verse that we discussed on Monday, Krishna was speaking about the power of devotion. So he says, as far as he himself is concerned, that he looks upon all souls in this world with equal eye. He does not favor them, or he does not hate them. Which is usually for, in this world, normal people like us, we like some people, we don't like some people. And that is also due to our bodily conception of life. Right? We have a certain way of thinking about things. So things that are congruent with our way of thinking, that is very nice. And things that are not congruent with our way of thinking, they're not nice. We have this love and hate thing, this prejudices there, isn't it? You like certain ice cream, you don't like others. You like certain people, you don't like other certain people, isn't it? Even if you're spiritual. So that if you're like, I'm spiritual. And then you don't like people who are not spiritual. So in this way, this prejudice is there in regular souls, jivas, but this prejudice does not exist in Krishna because of his transcendence. So he says that, and this is the previous verse we were studying, 929, that he does not favor or hate any souls, where he looks upon all souls equally. He says, but for those who worship me with devotion, then I am attached to them and they are attached to me. We share a mutual attachment to one another because that is a relationship of devotion. So we brought this point up, and I'm just repeating it briefly here so we can move on. But this relationship of devotion is transcendental. It is spiritual. It is not part of the duality world. In the duality world, when you love someone, you can hate them also. That's a very interesting thing about duality. Just like you have these TV shows that you may watch or have watched in the past, and I always joke about this. In the first season, you'll have like the epic couple of the season, and there's like this epic, most wonderful thing, and they profess their love to each other, and it's like, there's no one else for me like you, and all this sort of crap that we get lost in. Like, wow, so beautiful. I wish that was. And then by the next season, there's some rough ground is coming. And by the end of the second season, they're like, I'm just not in love with you anymore. And then they become enemies also. The third season, they become like vicious enemies and they fight. So love in this world is like that. It's part of the duality world. So if you love someone in this world, you can also hate them just as much. Even those persons who are capable of doing great good in the material world, they're also capable of doing great evil. That's just the way that cookie crumbles, actually. I always find it interesting now because you have people who are really into like things such as social justice. And many of them are not grounded spiritually, or they don't have perhaps a spiritual philosophy. So they see themselves as doing good for the world. They have a certain social idea, whatever it may be, a liberal idea or a conservative idea or whatever they call it. And it's the best thing for the world and it's good for the world. And you see, and they're doing good. They're prepared in some cases to do evil to others, to beat them up because they have the wrong ideas, to kill them even. I remember when Donald Trump, I always give this example, when Donald Trump was inaugurated as president, they had a women's march. And Madonna was invited as a guest speaker because I guess she has really nice political opinions. I don't know. But she was invited, and she said, I've thought, one of her opening statements was that I've thought a lot about blowing up the White House. And I remember hearing that and I was like, isn't that evil? There might be so many innocent people working in the White House, innocent in just like objective sense, like they're just the nannies of the building and so on, just trying to make an honest living for their children and so on. But in her mind, she may have been thinking if she could do such a thing, that it would be for the greater good because Donald Trump is such an evil person and so on. So in any case, whether someone agrees with her or not is besides the point that I'm making. My point is that the nature of duality is that those who are capable of good are also capable of evil. And that's just the way that cookie crumbles. If you study one future text, a follow-up text to the Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, so there's this, anyway, I bring this up quickly. Question, there's this one devotee, his name is Ajamila. So he lived a very sinful life for a large portion of his life. And when he was about to die, the order carriers of death came to capture his soul and bring him to hell. But because he had chanted the name of Narayana, which is purely spiritual, then the Lord's servants, known as Vishnus, they came to stop them. And they asked the Yamadutas, the order carriers of death, who is worthy of punishment in this world? And so amongst the many brilliant things the Yamadutas say to the Vishnudutas, one thing they mention is that everyone in this world is punishable, actually. Because everyone is being impelled by material forces. Sometimes our material forces is called the sattva, a goodness force. But then there's a passionate force, there's an ignorant force also. So as long as souls are impelled by material forces, sometimes they are capable of good, but sometimes they are capable of evil. And because of that, everyone in this world is actually can be subject to punishment at some point. They will do this. And there's easier ways of saying this. Everyone has a dark side, has a shadow side. You have a dark side?
Yes.
You have a dark side?
No.
So wow, we have a pure person amongst us. We should take his guidance afterwards. Otherwise, generally everyone says they have different language they like to use for their shadow self, dark side, shadow self.
It's hard to recognize that.
Well, for me, it's not at all hard to recognize. In myself, I mean, I when my shadow side's coming up, it's pretty clear. There's the shadow side. But you probably are a very nice person, at least in this life. So maybe it's a little bit subtle for yourself. But for some of us, I think maybe for men in general, it's kind of easy to recognize it. I don't. My soul is not in the woman's body this life, so I don't know how that works. But I think for most men, we could say when our shadow side is coming up, it's pretty clear. It's pretty. I won't give any examples, but it's pretty self-evident that the shadow side is acting now. So in any case, this is how this duality world works. But bhakti is sometimes translated as love also, but it's beyond duality. So it's not that I loved at one point and then I hated at another point. So it is very hard to understand what is this non-dual devotion or non-dual love. Love you have in the material world, you can call it dualistic love. So that's why it also comes with hate. But this is non-dual love, so that, even that's just a word, you can't even conceive what that means, non-dual love. But whatever it is, this non-dual love causes an attachment of God to his devotee, and the devotee becomes attached to God because of this non-dual love or bhakti. So Krishna, having made that statement in 929, and 930 and 31, he wants to show the extent of that attachment that he has for his devotee due to the influence of bhakti or non-dual devotion. He wants to show the extent of that attachment. So in 930, he makes a statement, a very nice statement. Api chat sudaracharo bhajate mama nanyabak sadureva samantavya samyagya vasito visa. Okay, I get everything is okay, clear, you can understand. So he says, even if my devotee does the most abominable action, if he's engaged in devotional service, he is to be considered saintly because he is properly situated in his determination. So abhicha sudaracharo means, achar means like behavior, achara. And durachar means bad behavior. And sudurachar means like very bad, something like grossly horrible. He said, apichat sudaracharo. Api means even if my devotee does something, translated here as abominable. So the idea of putting this apichat is to say that generally that doesn't happen, that the devotee would do something. He just wants to make a point. But a point, and the point that he's trying to make is a point about his attachment to his devotee. So even if my devotee does something most abominable, generally he's not doing because he's not attracted to the world of virtue and vice. When you're conditioned, as we are conditioned, we're attracted to virtue and vice, isn't it? If you see a virtuous person, you feel they are very nice. And if you see a vicious person, then you don't feel good about that. Or you become preoccupied with that, virtue and vice. But these saintly persons, they're not attracted to virtue or vice. But still, he wants to make this point. Even if my devotee does something most abominable, generally that does not happen because they're not attracted to virtue and vice. So they would not perform such activities. But even if they do, Bhajate Mam Ananya Bhak, if they worship me with exclusive devotion, Ananya Bhak means taking only Krishna as a shelter, not taking shelter of the, the law agency, trying to get out of something. They may have done something very horrible. They will take that also, the reaction for their horrible reaction, not trying to get out of it. For example, Parikshit Maharaj, this is also a character of Srimad Bhagavatam. He performed this act of putting a dead snake around putting a dead snake as a garland around the neck of a yogi who was in meditation because he felt slighted by that yogi. The yogi didn't know he was there because he was in meditation, but he felt slighted, so he put one garland to make fun. And that yogi's son cursed him to die in 7 days. Before he got news of the curse, he felt very bad about what he had done, considering it most abominable. And then he immediately thought, may a full reaction come upon me so it doesn't extend to my whole kingdom. He was considered emperor of the world at the time. And then he got news that he was going to die in 7 days, and he was like, wonderful. Now the full force of the reaction has come. And he just decided to take shelter of God. And he went to the bank of Ganga, and then later on he heard the sacred literature, Srimad Bhagavatam. He passed his life in this way. So here is an example like this. Even if my devotee does something abominable, if he worships me with exclusive devotion, that means not taking shelter, as I'm giving example, law agency, trying to get reaction can also come. But I will simply take shelter of the Supreme Lord, knowing him as only worshipable entity. Then Krishna says, Sadhu Reva. That person is certainly a sadhu. Or sadhu, generally word sadhu, at least as an image, means like a saintly person. Or the word sadhu means good also. Sadhu, like sometimes sadhu means it is good, it is good. So he is sadhu eva. Sadhu eva means he is certainly a sadhu. And samantavya, this is my injunction. That means that if you do not see it in this way, then you are also transgressing an injunction of the sacred text. It is very hard to see a person who has done something vicious in a positive light. And they don't have, I always joke like this, they don't even have to do something vicious. They can do something as inexcusable as give a feedback. I always give that example because I've just seen how it pinches people when you give feedback. So, or when I receive the feedback, you feel just like very uneasy about it, about that person. So, what to speak of someone doing something vicious to you? It's very hard to see them in a positive light. Very difficult. So, sadhu reva means this person is certainly a sadhu. Samantavya.